Alright guys, Budrina Wunya. You're good, Awabakal Nura. I'm here today in Munmora State Conservation Area. I'm up at Waibung Trig Point. And I want to talk to you guys today about UHF radios and in particular some of the rules and regulations surrounding them. Now for you and I that generally run around in a four-wheel drive, most of us have got an in-car UHF radio of some sort, be it GME, Oricom, Uniden, whatever brand it might be. We've generally got an in-car radio or we've got a handheld like you can see here. The problem with that is anybody can go out and buy themselves a UHF radio, be it a handheld or an in-car unit, with no license requirements, no having to sit tests and know what we can and can't do on them, and generally there's nothing on any of the packaging to actually say what channels we should and should not be using. That's why I've come up with this sticker that you can pick up off the mix4wd.com website for $5 including postage, and that will tell you all the channels that you can and cannot use and what specific ones are set out for. So today we're going to discuss that. First thing I do want to talk about though is your kids. See, a lot of us have got kids and they love to play with walkie talkies and the radios. Now in general, yes, fair enough, you might just throw on one of your handhelds, or a lot of kids, and I know I did back in the day, I had walkie talkies. They're just cheap, crappy things from Kmart or Big W, like the ones you can see on the screen here. Now this first one here, you'll note in the center there's a little dot with a frequency on it. That is a UHF radio frequency, and that frequency equates to be UHF channel 1, which is actually a repeater channel. But I'll get more into that a little bit later. Other ones, such as this one here, have changeable channels, which allow your kid to have up to 80 different channels that they can communicate between each other on. Now here's where part of the problem lies. As we mentioned with the sticker and some rules and regulations stating that we can and cannot use certain channels, or that certain channels can only be used for certain things. These ones where you can change the channel, and the same as the handheld UHF radios that you and I buy for our adventures, we can access channels 1 through to 80. But there's no mention of what channels we can and can't use. See, channels 5 and 35 are both repeater channels, and they are emergency service channels only, or emergency channels. So if you're out in the middle of nowhere or somewhere, something happens, you're on a hike and you have a fall or something like that, you can call on 5 and 35 using the repeater, the duplex frequencies, and you can call for help. That's what these channels are dedicated for. They are not for general chatter. They're not for calling your mates in a convoy or trying to find out where somebody is or listening to road safety updates or anything like that. They are for emergency contact only. Now I'm doing this video partly because of that. You see, the last few days here on the Central Coast, there's been a couple of young boys continuously chattering on UHF 5. This has aggravated a lot of the locals that tune in, like I do, and just scan on their radios. They've been getting on there and they've been trying to tell these kids to change channels, but either they're not receiving the signal or they're just simply not listening. And unfortunately, yesterday, they actually started getting quite abusive. Now, misuse of channels 5 and 35 can lead to huge fines, up to $500,000 and 5 years in prison if you're deemed to be interfering with an emergency operation. But generally, it's somewhere up about $155,000 or $165,000. That's a lot of money for your kid to be playing around on the wrong channel. So that's why I've done these stickers as well, is so that you guys can get out there and you can grab one and know that you're on the right channel. Now these kids' radios are generally very low powered, but I have to say I've been hearing these kids between Nora Head, Toukley and Budgewoi over the last few days, and I've heard them a little bit since I've parked up here today at Munmora. So this leads me to believe that they're using more powerful radios and not just a kid's one. They're using something more along the lines of these. So what other channels can we and can we not use? Well, as mentioned, channel 5 and 35 are an emergency repeater channel. Channels 1 through to 8 and 31 through to 8 are also repeater channels and should not be generally used for general chatter or for work purposes. Now, I quite often hear tradies chatting on 37 and 38. They shouldn't really be used for that sort of purpose. And I have to say, I've even heard traffic controllers at roadworks and that doing the same thing, chatting on these repeater channels. Channel 10 is generally reserved for four-wheel drive clubs, convoys, and national parks. So there's another channel that, unless you're in a four-wheel drive club and a convoy, you shouldn't really be using or working for national parks. by all means listen in, and if you need to communicate on it, by all means do so. But it's not one that you should generally be talking on. Now, we all know the Truckies channel, generally UHF 40. Well, on the east coast between Queensland and South Australia, right through New South Wales and east coast of Queensland and that, channel 29 is our Truckies channel here. And it's not a Truckies channel per se, it is a road safety channel. Now, this channel can be used by anyone at any time, but it's really not one that I think should be listened to, especially if you've got young kids in the car. Some of the language on that can be really foul. But along the east coast, 29, and throughout the rest of Australia, channel 40 for your road safety channels. So tune into those and have a bit of a listen, see what's going on. If you get into a situation where you're held up in traffic, you can generally call ahead and try and find out what's going on, how far the traffic conditions may be, things like that. I do it quite often coming back from Sydney up along the M1 motorway. The channels 22 and 23 and 61 through to 63 are reserved for telemetry data. These are not a voice communication channel. You cannot use them to talk to your mates. They are reserved for telemetry data transfer only. Channel 18 is generally reserved for caravanners and campers when you're travelling around. Again, convoys and things like that, when you've got a couple of caravanners and that travelling around. Channel 18 is generally reserved for that. So that's the main aspect, guys, in regard to channels that you should and should not be using. Again, channel 5 and 35. Do not use it unless it is an emergency. If your kids play with your radios or have their own where they can change channels, make sure they are not transmitting on 5 or 35. There are a couple of base stations here on the Central Coast. Nura Head Marine Rescue, I believe, is one of them. And they actually have directional tracking systems there where they can point a line in your direction to work out where it's coming from. They can use that from a couple of different stations to pinpoint your exact location. You know what they say, X marks the spot. Well, they can use these tracking systems and they can find out where you are. So if you're using the wrong channels, such as 5 and 35, they can track you, they can find out where you are, and you can receive huge fines. So again, guys, I cannot stress this enough. 5 and 35 should never be used except in a case of emergency. If you're still a little unsure and you want to come back and have something to check out the information and everything, again, the stickers are available for $5, including postage on the website. They're great up on the windscreen of the car. I've got one myself, just so that I can be 100% sure I'm not on the wrong channel. Now for a couple other factors with the radios. Generally we hear the terms copy, over and out, etc. There's also tail end Charlie, where you're the last vehicle in a convoy and you're transmitting to others, or others are trying to transmit to you. They can be calling you by the name tail end Charlie. Majority of users these days, especially in the four-wheel drive community, I don't believe generally use the correct terminology, such as copy, over and out, etc. Majority of us don't use it, neither do the truckies and whatnot either. But by all means, when somebody messages you and needs to say something, a quick copy, so that they're aware that you've got that. It comes in very handy. And it can save people turning around going, hang on, what was that? What was that? Did you copy that? Did you hear me? And I've had that issue before too. One big thing to remember with UHF radios, be it a handheld radio or in the car, majority of them have a scan feature. Now this feature is great. Absolutely love it. I always try to use it when I'm up in the Waddigan Mountains or travelling anywhere. Just on the simple factor that if there's somebody calling for help on one of the channels, then I can hopefully hear them and I might be able to go and assist. Or if I happen to get into trouble, I know what channels other people are talking on. So I might be able to call for a little bit of help. So the scan feature is great, but keep in mind some of the language and some of the topics on the radio are really not suitable for young children. And if you are using one of these radios, stop and think to yourself, hang on, could there be a kid listening? Even if you are in a place like up in the Waddigans and you're out wheeling with a bunch of mates, could one of your mates or somebody else in the convoy have a child? Could somebody else not far away have a child in the car that they don't want to hear you swearing and carrying on? So please keep that in mind. I have to say I was absolutely disgusted a couple of days ago on Channel 29 listening to somebody abusing all the truck drivers and saying it was disgusting behaviour. But it happens. It's all too common on the radio, and unfortunately there's not a lot we can do about it. In some areas, if you sit there during the night and throw the radio on, you can pick up the repeater channels. 1 through to 8, and some of the stuff you can hear on that is absolutely disgusting. I remember sitting down at Yarramundi down on the Nepean River for a fishing competition when I first purchased my UHF radio for the car. Because it was a plug and play system, I took it down and I plugged it into the battery box, and the things we were hearing off the radio that night on Channel 4 were absolutely disgusting. Great for a laugh if you've got a bit of a sense of humour and you're a bit more open-minded, but for a kid, really not something they should be hearing. So that's basically it, guys, when it comes to channels and what you can and cannot be using. Now, the last thing I want to mention is the power of your radio. See, this little radio here, it's only a little 1 watt unit. These other little Uniden ones sitting next to me, they're the ones I started off with, and they're actually a 1/2 watt unit. The two that I have in the car, however, are 5 watt units, and that is the maximum legal strength you can have in Australia without having a license. Some of these Bofang units and things like that you can purchase off eBay and from overseas, they could be up to 10 watts or more. They are actually illegal to use here in Australia. Some of them also have programmable channels where you can communicate outside our standard frequency range. And again, that's illegal here in Australia and can face huge fines and even imprisonment. So make sure if you are looking to purchase a UHF radio here in Australia that it's a reputable brand such as GME, and make sure that it complies with all our rules and regulations. Well, everything you'll buy over the counter here is legal, but when you're buying from eBay and things like that, that's where you can get into that grey area and you can get yourself into some trouble. Alright guys, well that's going to be about it for this video. It's about all I can really say. Remember, stay off 5 and 35. If you've got kids that use the radio, again, make sure they stay off 5 and 35. And even if it is a cheap, crappy radio that you've purchased from Kmart or Big W or wherever it might be, make sure you monitor their use and what's being said, because these are a public channel. Anybody can jump on and listen in, and anybody can communicate with you, or in some cases, your children. So make sure that you're monitoring what's going on. Make sure you're on the correct channels. If you're unsure, again, grab one of the stickers off the website, mix4wd.com, and just make sure you guys are doing the right thing with the radios, in car and out, be it a handheld on a track or whatever, or your in-car unit, or just a toy for your kids. You buy a cheap toy for your kids, maybe it's not a bad idea to buy yourself a cheap UHF handheld, just so that you can have that next to you and you can listen into what's going on as well. Alright guys, I'm going to cut it there. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've found some useful information, and I hope it's helped you to become a better radio user and helped you to pick the correct units, not just for yourself, but for your kids if you do want to buy them Walkie Talkies or anything like that. So, alright guys, thanks for watching. Remember, please leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and yeah, take care, peace, and as always, I'll see you on the tracks. Yano!